This presentation of In Their Own Words is dedicated to the brave men and women of the United States Armed Forces. By 1942, the air over Germany was aflame with German fighters battling Allied bombers for the survival of Europe and the free world. Central to this air war were the planes of the Allies. At first, they were obsolete and woefully inadequate death traps, and fell from the skies like crushed autumn leaves. But with the advent of planes like the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-51 Mustang, the tide of war was about to change. But no airplane fights a war. It must be flown by a skilled pilot. A man like Clarence Bud Anderson, who first flew the revolutionary P-51 Mustang while escorting bombers over Germany. But in the evil dark skies ahead lay in wait the fighters of the Luftwaffe, who would challenge Bud Anderson and his amazing new airplane. He would soon learn the best and the worst his incredible machine had to offer.
Yeah, I flew P-51s in World War II, flying from England in the European theater with the 357th Fighter Group, part of the 8th Air Force, escorting heavy bombers over Europe. I flew 2 tours of combat. Total of 116 missions, 480 hours and 20 minutes of combat flying, and I had 16 and a quarter victories, and 1 in the air, 1 on the ground, and a couple other probables and damaged in the air too. Generally speaking, while we were escorting the bombers, we had a pretty set pattern of how to fly. The bomber stream would be going straight ahead, and we would set up on a 45 degree to them, making 90-degree turns, kind of zigzagging over the top of the bombers. And we'd put airplanes there close to the bombers, and then we'd put flights out to the side that could range around and go up ahead of them, so we could break off where they were massing the airplanes to come in and make head-on attacks. And with this pretty high altitude, you'd be from 30,000 feet, which is pretty high in those days, unpressurized airplanes. And that was another disadvantage of the P-51. It was pretty cold up there and in those temperatures. And we always operated in group strength. I'm talking about 48 airplanes. Every time we went out, we took a whole group. That'd be 3 squadrons of 16 airplanes flying 4 ships. It'd be a 4-ship. And you could look at it this way: as those are 4 airplanes, and 4 airplanes. That would be a squadron formation too. And it was very maneuverable and capable. So then you got into this position, and everybody's looking across each other to look for enemy airplanes. The 2 leaders, the element leader and the flight leader, their job was to look for the enemy in an aggressive manner, to attack rather than from a defensive standpoint. Your wingmen look back for defense.
The P-51 was an amazing aggressive aircraft, and it flew into service in the European theater when abilities of planes like the Spitfire were being severely taxed.
It arrived in a combat configuration, the B and the D model with the Rolls-Royce engine, at a time when it was needed. And the big features that the P-51 had was its long range. I mean, it could go anywhere that the heavy bombers could go and come back, stay with them, and bring them home. So it arrived at a time when the daylight bombing was in jeopardy. They were having heavy losses when they would get out of fighter escort range. And now here we come with a P-51 that can take them all the way into Germany, all the way to Posen, Poland, down to Czechoslovakia, wherever in Europe, stay with them and bring them back. So that was the key feature in that theater for the P-51. Of course, the other features that made the P-51 so special was its high maneuverability and high performance. It was very fast on the deck, on the ground, or at high altitude due to the two-stage, two-speed supercharger. And so adding it up, the long range, the high speed, maneuverability were the key features of the P-51. Comparing the P-51 with different Allied fighters, they were built for different things, and then depends on what you're going to use them for. For example, if you want to say compare a Spitfire with a P-51, the Spitfire couldn't go where the Mustang goes. And so, you know, a lightweight P-51 with the fuel load down and the ammo load down, a good pilot could hold his own with a Spitfire, but a Spitfire was built to defend right over the airfield, point defense. And of course it was highly maneuverable, but the Mustang could hold its own with, you know, a lot depended on the pilot. But we used to like to say that the Mustang could do all day over Berlin what the Spitfire could do for 45 minutes over its own airfield. The P-51, of course, was originally designed for ground attack. The A-36, the very original model of what the P-51 became, was a ground attack airplane. The only we did some ground attack around invasion time, June the 6th, when we invaded Europe. They took all the 8th Air Force fighter groups and put us in a ring behind the beaches, away from the beaches. And for 30 days we went over there with a whole fighter group twice a day and shot up everything that moved on the ground. And then, of course, sometimes we would have ground attack missions set up back in Germany, or you'd freelance on your way home, shooting up trains and things like this. One of the disadvantages of the P-51 was the liquid-cooled engine that had to have a radiator to keep the engine cool. And, of course, if you got a hole in your radiator system and you lost your coolant, that'd be pretty devastating. You know, you don't fly much longer without your coolant. But so against ground attack, you might get a piece of flak or a bullet hole through your coolant system, and you know, that was a hazard.
But that was not the only downside of the tricky fighter plane.
Well, the P-51's a beautiful airplane as it was, had some bad flight characteristics. There was a 85-gallon fuselage tank located right behind the pilot, and that gave it a FCG when you were flying at a full fuel load. So fuel management was important. If you were going to go on a very long-range flight, you need to manage your fuel properly. And if you had to have that, all of the fuel, say like you took off on a main tank, go to your externals, drop your externals, go onto your internal fuel, burn down half of the fuselage tank, then you had a stable airplane. But supposing you got jumped early with a full fuselage tank, then you're fighting with an unstable airplane until you got that tank down. After you got the tank down to half, it was a beautiful airplane. And being an unstable airplane just meant that it was real tricky to fly. You got a stick force reversal, and in a tight turn, the thing would try to wrap up real tight, and you'd be holding forward on the stick. Very unnatural for a pilot. Other features that early, when we had the B models with the 4 guns, we had a lot of gun problems. The gun would stop firing, but generally speaking, the airplane performance was so vastly better than the opposition, in my opinion, that you kind of overlooked some of these things. And you could work around the unstable flying part. The biggest advantage I saw of the P-51 over the opposition, the Germans, was its performance, generally speaking. I always felt that I could outmaneuver any German airplane with the P-51, and therefore, I had that. To me, was the big advantage. If I saw an ME-109 or an FW-190, it didn't matter to me. I felt I could outmaneuver them, outperform them, no matter where it was.
But it would take more than fast airplanes to kill the German juggernaut. The men behind the joystick made all the difference.
What characteristics make a good fighter pilot, or what characteristics separate the good fighter pilot from the super pilot, or the ace, you might say? It's a little hard to. There's so many factors that are really kind of indivisible, not one being more important than the other. Training, probably, the guy with the most experience generally is going to be the best pilot. So experience level was very important. If you had lots of training, lots of flying time, that was important. Knowing your airplane, knowing your tactics, knowing the enemy, knowing his tactics and capabilities was important. Personal traits, eyesight was important in World War II because, we didn't have radar and things like this. You had to see them, it was all visual. And most of the aces that I know had exceptional vision, and I had good vision. All pilots had to have 20/20 eyesight, but mine would test out to 20/10 or 20/15, which is, better than normal. And then there's also kind of a knack of being able to see enemy airplanes, and maybe there's a little motivation there too. Do you want to see them? But most of the aces that I know personally had good eyesight, and that gave them an advantage. If you see somebody before he sees you, you can get yourself into a position of advantage to attack. Everything being gunnery was very important, knowing how to shoot. This is in the days of essentially like World War I. We had a fixed gun sight, and instead of a ring and bead, we had electronic ring and bead, you might say, until we got the K-14 gun sight later in the war. That was a gyro gun sight, and that made a lot of difference too. But having that training and knowing how to lead an enemy, estimate the range and your angle off, and where to aim ahead of it's like bird shooting, like shooting quail. It takes experience, and so that was very important. Now, I've been asked many times, if what made the difference between one or the other, and I've thought about it a lot. Say, everything being equal, suppose the pilots were trained equally, and there's hardly any difference. Then I think there's some kind of some people call it a fighting spirit, something inside. I would say it's probably motivation. Probably makes a real difference between the enemy and yourself, or amongst your own peers. Another factor in this in the fighting was, it probably sounds corny today, but was patriotism. You go back to World War II, and our entire country was involved in the war. I mean, 100%. There wasn't a family in the United States that was not affected by the war in some manner. The other thing is, it's a little bit hard to say. We were young. Most of the guys I know, that aces or, well, all of us fighting, were young. It was a big adventure. I hate to say that I enjoyed flying combat, but it certainly was a big adventure at that time. I had several one-on-one engagements. Most of the time, a kill is done by, there's an enemy airplane, you come up, sneak up behind him and shoot him down, and that's it. But I had several engagements where I'm fighting individually with a German airplane. Probably my most memorable one was one time when I think it was in the spring, probably May of 1944, in the spring of 44 anyway. And we were on a bomber escort mission. The weather was clear, absolutely brilliant clear. From 30,000 feet we could see the ground and we could see everything. Which is unusual because weather was usually a factor in almost everything you did in Europe in World War II. We were escorting bombers, and they were just about to go from France into Germany, and I'm escorting over the top of the bombers in this zigzag, a close escort. And as we made this 90-degree turn, first we heard on the radio up ahead of us there was activity going on. Enemy airplanes were starting to attack. So we dropped our tanks, made a sharp turn to follow the bomber stream to get up ahead to see what was going on. Well, when we made that turn, that threw my flight to the outside. And of course, whenever you're the last flight and you're in a turn, you're vulnerable. So I remember looking back over my right shoulder up high, just about the time my wingman said, "Hey, we got 4 bogeys coming in at 5 o'clock high." That meant 4 enemy airplanes attacking us from the rear. So obviously they were attacking us. We're the last flight, and so we had to break into them. They're coming down like this. We break into them, try to come back directly at them, make a head-on pass. And this was around 30,000 feet. And so we made them, they could not attack us. That broke their attack, and they went out here. That put us all in string. I mean, 4 airplanes, one behind the other, and 4 Germans, one behind the other. And now here we are going around and around like this up there. Well, it was right at the altitude where the P-51's 2-stage, 2-speed supercharger gave you full power. And so, here we are at full RPM and full throttle, and we're gaining on these, they were Messerschmitt Me-109s. And we gradually gained on them and starting to make that turn where, they could see us cutting them off. So they rolled out and went directly east back into Germany, just in level flight, which is pretty unusual. Normally, the Germans were trying to attack the bombers and probably didn't give the fighters that much concern. So here these guys are attacking fighters. They're running level. They want to fight. They're not diving to the ground as soon as they see a disadvantage. So we line up behind them, start to chase them. The 4th guy starts to climb. Well, this would have put us underneath him, and then, he could have dropped down on us. So I sent my element, my other 2 guys, started to chase him. They chased him and eventually shot him down in a separate conflict. Now we got 3 guys ahead of us, and the 2, myself and my wingman, following, straight and level. Mustang wide open, just gradually crept right up behind him, got within range, just a zero angle off, just the perfect kind of a shot you want. Dead astern, get in close, fire, you get hits, flame, very simple. The guy rolls over and he's through. Now we got the other two guys, and they're starting to dance around a little bit, probably talking on the radio. This guy's getting shot. And the flight leader makes a very hard turn like this, and the wingman rolls over and heads for the ground. So now I've got the one flight leader and myself and my wingman. So he made such a sharp turn that I couldn't get behind him. It was almost like a 90-degree shot, and you can't hit anything at 90 degrees. You got to be around here closer to the zero angle off. So I decided to maintain my airspeed and zoom over the top of him and pull up like this. Well, as soon as I did that, he turned around and tried to start to chase us. He reversed his turn, came underneath, and now my wingman is vulnerable. So I told him to, hey, take it down, do some evasive maneuvers to thwart his attack. And sure enough, the wingman goes down, the Messerschmitt starts to follow him. Well, now that puts me right behind again. Now I'm right behind the Messerschmitt. And of course he sees us. This guy is experienced. He's a flight leader. My wingman's gone. Now it's flight leader versus flight leader, one-on-one. So here we go. And he's going down, separates out, and I'm coming in again on him. He makes a very hard turn again. Here I am, I'm looking at him 90 degrees, point blank, and I can't do anything. So again, I pull over the top of him. He follows, comes around after me now. And I keep pulling up, and looking back over my left shoulder, I can close my eyes today and still see that nose of that Messerschmitt down there trying to pull it. Now he's got to get his nose above me to get a shot. He has to lead me. So he's down here below, and I'm pulling, and he's pulling, and I'm pulling, and we're going steeper and steeper and steeper. Well, pretty soon we're going to run out of airspeed and ideas, and the first one that does is in a little bit of a trouble. Well, sure enough, I saw him. He started to shudder just before I did, and he stalls and I stall, and we turn the airplanes around, and here we go down again. And now I'm back in the driver's seat. He flies on out, separates. Here he comes again, another hard turn, just like this, and there I am again. It's not quite the same this time, and I didn't like being up there in that position with him behind me, so I said, this time I'm going to try something a little bit different. I put down a little bit of flaps, pulled back on the power just a little bit, and really pulled that thing in. And he saw this, and sure enough, I was going to make it. I see that I could make it. So he reverses his turn and pulls the airplane straight up. And he probably thought that I had pulled it back to idle and sucked it in like this. If I had, I would not have any energy, and I'd just kind of fall out of the sky. But instead, I had a lot of power. I just shoved the power full up, followed him up, and I got him up here going about 45 degrees. It felt like I was right almost in the top of a loop, and started firing about 30 degrees. Well, no, it was in closer, about 20 degrees. And got hits all around the fuselage, the cockpit, and everything. After I stopped firing, it was a big burst of coolant, and it was an ME-109 coolant and smoke and pieces coming off. I coasted right up alongside of him, and here I am just sitting, flying formation with him, and he started to roll like this. The cockpit was full of smoke. And I could count the rivets on the airplane. I was that close and see the grease in the wheel well and all that. And he rolled over and started down a very steep angle, not maneuvering, just straight. And it was so clear that I could follow the smoke trail very easily. And I followed him down to about 25,000 feet, and I got up to a very high speed, enough where I didn't want to go any faster. And I thought, well, okay, if he's survived, we'll fight him another day. But I followed him down. Pretty soon I could see his shadow, and it's pretty dramatic. He flew, he met his shadow and burst in a big explosion. It was a pretty dramatic day. We joined up our flight and rejoined and went back and escorted the bombers, went home. We'd shot down 3 out of 4 that day. It was pretty successful. I got my 5th kill without firing a shot. And we were coming home, just a four-ship flight, and we were down in southern France somewhere. And all of a sudden, these Focke-Wulfs were above us, and they started attacking us. Well, every time they'd come down, we'd turn into them, and we'd break off the tack. They'd go right back up to their high spot, and they'd keep tracking us, and then they'd come down again, and we'd break into them, and they'd pull up, and they stayed at the position of advantage. And we're trying to work our way home toward the coast, and all of a sudden a P-47 comes screaming down on us. And he probably thought we were ME-109s. Well, what do we got to do? We got to break into him and make him knock off his attack. And then he probably saw they were P-51s. I can see that poor guy today. He pulled up like this and he was probably looking back, says, "Oh shucks, P-51s." And this Focke-Wulf came right down, just zapped right on his tail, blew him up. Well, the Focke-Wulf lost all of his energy when he did that. He had to pull it in tight, and that put me right on his tail. And just as soon as I got there in a position to shoot, the guy pulls up, bails out. and so, I became an ace with no shooting. You have to realize that the Germans were over their own territory. They had lots of airplanes. Pilots were one of their problems. They were short pilots. And later on, this was still in the spring of 44 when they were, it was still touch and go. We were trying to get air superiority. But sure, if the guy's just about to be shot down, flip over and bail out, and he's going to survive. We got a lot of them that bailed out very quickly, when they got hit or damaged. They were very quick to bail out.
But the German pilots survived to fight another day with a terrifying, potentially war-winning machine, the Me-262 jet fighter.
After we started seeing the German jet airplanes, my good buddy Chuck Yeager, of course, shot one down. And he didn't tell many people that he shot it down, but he shot it down with the gear down. He got it in the traffic pattern. Well, that's really about the only way you can get them. And of course, I was anxious to, see a jet airplane and get one. And I was experienced when this happened. We're going on our way into Germany, and we're all flying kind of a line abreast, more in line going out. We still had our drop tanks, and I saw this jet off to my right, very low, and he's at 90 degrees to us, going underneath. He's going to go underneath us, but way down. I mean, something like 8,000-9,000 feet. So I'm thinking of a plan. Now, if I wait right here and he flies underneath me at this point, and if I do it just right, I'll drop my tanks, I'll roll over and make a 90-degree turn while I roll over. Then I can dive, and I'll stay upside down, and then I can look through the top of the canopy, see him, and come down, and then just at the right time roll out underneath him. And so I'm waiting, and just at the right time I drop my tanks. Well, the engine quit. I had forgot to switch to the main tank, before he dropped the thing. I was rolled over here. I was here I was 30,000 feet upside down with the prop ran away, and but I got the tank changed. I got it over, got the prop under control, and I still think I can pull it off. You know, here I am going down, upside down. I say, hey, I'm really gaining on this guy, and so I come down, I pull around underneath him and pull up, put the sight on him. Well, I was still, maybe if I'd fired right then, I might have been, you know, able to get hits. But I thought, boy, I've been really diving here. I'm going to close on the guy. And he just disappeared right behind the pipper in the sight. he probably had a 100-mile-an-hour advantage in speed over me, so it was kind of ridiculous. One other time I chased one that had come through the bombers and was diving away. And I was the closest one to him, and so I rolled in and started down with him. Well, God, he probably had 250 knots advantage going away. But, you know, we're going to go after him. And I got my flight with me. We're going down. Pretty soon I looked around behind me, and here's P-51s and P-47s and airplanes coming from all directions. You know, the whole damn 8th Air Force is coming after him. And I was in front, and I didn't like that at all, so I just broke off there and left it. Our group shot down 17 German jets, which was the most that any group got in World War II. And some of them, if the Germans used the jets properly, we couldn't do too much. You know, if they used their speed advantage, they could. But if they tried to turn and dogfight, a Mustang would just eat them right up. Yeah, we could out-turn them, and then they'd lose their speed, and then you could just get right on their tail. You don't celebrate in a sense of, you know, it's more I celebrate surviving, and then there's the thing about killing. You know, I was raised a religious background, and but you get into this situation, it's kill or be killed, and you know, you do what you have to do. And I didn't come back. I guess I have to look back and think. Yeah, I think it was more you were happy that you survived rather than you say, hey, I got one. Although there was a lot of that. I mean, people were, you know, pretty happy when you shot down an airplane.
Another of those happy pilots was a friend of Clarence Anderson named Francis Gabby Gabreski, who flew the same war-torn skies over Europe in a larger, even more deadly fighter than the P-51. It was the plane known affectionately to its pilots as the Jug, the Republic P-47. But the first thing any pilot in the European Air War needed was training, the best training they could get.
Fighter pilots or anything else that you undertake, you're not born into it. You're trained into it. And the more training that you can get, the longer you do it, the better you become. So that was my case. I flew the P-36 and the P-40 in Hawaii, and after the war broke out, I was transferred to European Theater of Operations, but I had 500 hours. I had 500 hours flying time versus the new lieutenants that the 56 Fighter Group came over, they had 150 hours. So they barely checked out in their own airplane. In other words, they finished flying school and they barely checked out in their own airplane, and they were in combat. So I think I had the proper training. And then, of course, I had very good leadership. I had good leadership in my group commander, which was Colonel Hub Semke. He's probably one of the finest group commanders we had in the European Theater of Operations. So it's a combination of everything. And then we had a group of youngsters that were very energetic and eager. In other words, they weren't looking for an excuse to abort the mission. They wanted to get at the enemy. So we had exceptions to the rule that some of them weren't too eager, and they went by the wayside. But we sifted it down in time where we had a fighting competitive group. I learned to fly in the P-36, which was old technology fighters, in Hawaii. And I also flew the P-40, which was old technology, with the Allison engine. And it was a big nose up front, the propeller extended way forward and so forth. But there were great trainers. And the Flying Tigers did a reasonably good job in China with the P-40, but in a European theater of operations, they wouldn't exist for one mission. And it wasn't the airplane that you'd want to do combat with because it was inferior to the 109, the 190. 109's old technology. Remember that the 109 started out as a development in the 1930s, and they used it in combat for the very first time in Spain, the Civil War. And then, of course, they did a reasonable job there, and it was the backbone of the German fighter Luftwaffe later on. However, in 1941, there was a development of the Focke-Wulf 190, which was a bigger airplane. It was a better airplane. It was a little bit heavier and a little bit faster. So the technologies were changing considerably. So when I speak of the P-47 now, it's what I flew in the European Theater of Operations. The early P-47A and B was it was an airplane that was never tested. It came off the assembly line, and the pilots of the 56 Fighter Group picked it up as their operational equipment, and they're the ones that did the test work on it. Many of them did that test work at Farmingdale, New York. But they were the first ones that take the complete group of 100 airplanes over the European Theater of Operations. And I joined the group. Thank God that I had a little bit of experience because I flew with the Polish Air Force for 20 missions. I flew with them for about 3 months operationally to learn a little bit about the operations in the European theater before our forces arrived. So when our forces, the 56 Fighter Group, arrived, why, I was transferred from my temporary duty work with the 315 squadron that had Spit 9s. And when you look at a Spit 9 and look at a Focke-Wulf or a P-47, they're entirely different type aircraft. One is a escort aircraft, and the other is an interceptor. The Spit 9 was a good interceptor. As a matter of fact, it gave the Germans a real heartache over Germany because the rate of climb, the maneuverability, so forth, but everything was done over England. It had an endurance of about 1 hour and 5 minutes, an hour 10 minutes. You had to land someplace, and of course, if you weren't over England, why, you were lost to the operations of the war. So the P-47, as I went from the Spit 9 into the P-47, I remember the first time I saw the P-47 was at Gox Hill, which was in England, the western coast of England, as we were doing some operational training there. And when I looked at the airplane and compared it to what the Spitfire looked like, it was just about twice the size of a Spitfire. Well, I had to kind of adjust my thinking a little bit because that was the airplane I was going to do combat with for the next until either I was shot down or something else happened to me. So anyway, when I saw the airplane, I looked at it, it was, my God, they call it the jug. And the reason they call it the jug, it looks like a jug. It's great big, it's puffed out. And what makes it so big is are the ducts that fit underneath the airplane. They go from the engine to the turbine superchargers, that's in the tail end of the airplane. And a turbine supercharger is what makes the airplane, because you derive the 2,000 horsepower that you do at ground level up to its what you call ultimate level of 30,000 feet. So everything from zero ground level up to 30,000 feet, I can draw 2,000 horsepower. Other airplanes have a fixed gear system, so they have propellers, but the turbine do not have. So they can get, their best altitude is normally about 16,000 feet. Everything and above that, they can derive the full power. The power starts decreasing. So that as the power decreases, your performance decreases. So we had an unknown quantity in the P-47, and we knew that the best altitude was 30,000 feet. We knew that if we stayed up high and used the weight of the airplane and its power in a dive mode, well, we had the advantage in altitude. Never put yourself in a position where you're down low doing combat with a 109 or a 190 over their territory, particularly because the airplane was not that type of an airplane. So when the B-17s and the B-24s came into action over Germany, why the bombing altitude was about 23,000, 24,000 feet, in around that ballpark. So that left us, the P-47, at an altitude about 26,000, 27,000 feet. And so that we were in a close proximity of the bombers at all times, and if we saw any enemy aircraft coming in, we could convert our little altitude into speed and offset the Luftwaffe from hitting the B-17s or the B-24s. So I would say that the airplane did a reasonable job, but we did have our problems to start with. We had harness problems, we had detonation, so forth, high altitude, because the distributor was not pressurized, it was not sealed well enough, and so forth. So with time, we resolved those problems. That is, the people in the United States resolved the problems, and we had fixes that were put to the airplane in the field. So now that takes care of the first phase. That takes care of your P-47A, which was the first airplane up until about 44, the early part of 44. Early part of 44, we received what they call the P-47D. The P-47 was so great, the P-47D, that is, was so great because it had a paddle blade propeller, much bigger, much wider than anything that we had on the A or B. But that was for a reason, too, because they put water injection into the airplane, which meant that now instead of drawing 2,000 horsepower out of the same engine to hold down detonation, why they put water in, mixed it with the gasoline, and that held down your detonation. So now we were able to increase the compression, increase the manifold pressure, and so forth, which gave us, from 2,000 horses, we went to 2,385 horses. So that 385 additional horses made it a tremendous airplane. Not only the power, but the visibility of the pilot in the cockpit changed drastically, because from a regular canopy that had bars on it, we now had sort of what they call a bubble canopy. That was just like looking out of a tube, a glass tube. So it gave us tremendous visibility. Now, we had to learn very gradually as to what advantage that gave us over the Focke-Wulf 190 and the 109. And we did that gradually again. The most important thing that a pilot has to think about is, as he's going into combat, respect your adversary. In other words, don't underrate the adversary. And that was one big advantage that we had, because Zemke had experience. He was over in Russia with the Lend-Lease airplane, and he was our group commander of the 56 Fighter Group. And I was with the Polish Air Force, and they had tremendous respect for the Luftwaffe. So I came back and imparted a little bit of that philosophy to the pilots within the 56 Fighter Wing. And as a result, they were rather cautious until they learned more about their equipment and a little more about the enemy. So where the Germans in the early days, they were the pros. We, in the early days, were the amateurs. We knew nothing. We started out to become a pro. In other words, but you only become a pro with experience. And if you're shot down before you get that experience, you never get to be a pro. So that was the advantage the disadvantage that we had, we not knowing what the enemy was, and he was pretty sure because he was a pro. He was calm, cool, and collected, and we were nervous. There's no question. Not maybe nervous is not the real word for it. I could call it scared. Everybody was scared, but it was controlled fear. It was controlled fear. We're trained to fly the airplane. We were trained to be fighter pilots, and with experience in combat, we got to be pretty good after a certain period of time. You set down certain principles of combat, and our number one principle was, again, hit and miss. In other words, it was advantage in altitude, come down and make your move, and don't throttle back, don't slow up. Turn that speed into altitude. And there are certain principles that you have to live by, and some people have done pretty well with a lot of airplanes destroyed to their credit, but they were eventually destroyed because they slowed down for some obvious reason, so forth, in order to not only shoot that airplane down, but the one next to it. Well, I never did. In other words, if there were 5 airplanes all on side by side and I picked out my target, I didn't slow down for that airplane. My throttle was all the way forward, and I came in, picked off that target, but I closed into a very not what you call foot advantage. So I practically flew through the airplane. So then I came back and changed my speed, converted the speed into altitude again, and converted that altitude again into speed as I picked out my next target. But I can say that some people are blessed really in many ways. They had certain faculties that the good Lord must have given them, because I had my wingman was Robert Johnson, Bob Johnson, who was the second top ace in the European theater. And his eyes were the best that I have ever seen. He could pick out a spot out there when I was squinting and wondering where he sees that spot. He'd pick up that spot way off the distance, and he'd call it out to me, since he was my wingman and so forth. And it would take me a little while to get oriented, since I was a leader, get oriented and see that particular spot. Well, we lost many advantages that, because when you see the enemy or that spot, you convert your, whatever it is, the altitude to speed. You run that throttle all the way forward and try to get a little altitude over and above your enemy. Well, after few unsuccessful runs with me looking for the enemy and so forth. After Johnson called him in, I said, Bob, I says, why don't you, when you see the airplane, you see that spot there, the bogey is what we call it, or the bandit, call him in and you take over the lead, and I'll be your wingman. And boy, I'll tell you, from then on in, why we shot down quite a few airplanes. Because of his eyes, he was just uncanny. And I turned that, just those few seconds make a lot of difference, whether it's 4, 5, or 8, or 10 seconds. Makes a lot of difference. You convert that to what you have to do in order to get that initial advantage over the enemy. So Bob ended up with 27 airplanes to his credit, and I ended up with 28. But really, that was not our mission. Our mission was to escort the bombers, to keep the bombers, to prevent the bombers from being shot down. And I think we did an outstanding job in that particular field. It wasn't just shooting down the airplane. In other words, if a fighter was coming in, Luftwaffe fighter pilot was coming in on the bombers, and we went out and fired at him head on, and he turned over on his back and got away from the bombers, our job was complete. In other words, we'd pull right back up with the bombers and continue our escort.
With the busy fall season just around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Too busy with your end-of-summer goals to cook but want to make sure you're eating well? With Factor, skip the extra trip to the grocery store and the chopping, prepping, and cleaning up too, while still getting the flavor and nutritional quality you need. Factor's fresh, never-frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy, then get back to crushing your goals. Level up with Gourmet Plus options prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccolini, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. With Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in our meals. This August, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door, ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/warriors50 and use code warriors50 to get 50% off. That's code warriors50 at factormeals.com/warriors50 to get 50% off.
Now, that, let me put things in a little bit perspective. See, we were building up our force in the European theater from the day that the 56 went into combat. In other words, we started out with about 4 escort groups, and all of a sudden we probably ended up with 33 escort fighter groups. And we did the same thing with our bombers. You know, back in 42 of August, we had our first mission of B-17s over France. That was 12 bombers. And we built up operationally as we were operating and dropping bombs over the enemy territory. We were still building up the numbers. And the numbers were being built up because the production was increasing. And the aircraft were sent to the European theater operation. It got to a point where the pilots that finished flying school that were going to fly the B-17s or B-24s, they flew their own airplane. Can you imagine a man with 150 hours going over the north route or the southern route by way of Africa? I mean, it's scary. It's scary in every sense of the word. And Greenland, Iceland, my God, I mean, the weather's so unpredictable, and we lost a lot of people in that particular. But that's the only way we could get the airplane, the bombers, into the European theater of operations, which we did. And we finally ended up, towards the end, we were flying 1,400 airplane raids. Yeah. So we were losing, but we took our losses. We lost 5,000 B-17s or B-24s, heavy bombers. So that's a lot of airplanes. But we were building up. So what I'm trying to say here is it took that team. We had a good operational team in the 56th Fighter Group as well as in the 8th Air Force. And we had a good team back here in the United States. They were producing airplanes. And as they produced the airplanes, they made it possible for those airplanes to get to the operators in the field. So the enemy was taking its toll, but they were not excessive. The mission kept going on, and we made it because of the complete support and backing that we had of everybody.
Finally, the training and the hard work paid off, and it was time to fly deep into enemy territory. The mission? Destroy enemy transport capability before it destroyed the Allies.
I can talk about one mission, Hopperhofen, which was deep in Germany, north of the Ruhr. When I had a few elements go down to strafe a train that was moving along, and in their territory. And they went down, did their work, and so forth. And, of course, I said I would give them top cover. So I came down from 28,000 feet down to 15,000. When you come down to 15,000, you see so much more detail on the ground. And when I came down to 15,000, I looked at the ground, and there was an airdrome, well camouflaged, but I could see little airplanes. There was movement on the ground. And there were 190s that were taken off from that airdrome. So after they destroyed the train, they joined the group or the squadron, and I went down with them, picked out my target. We let down way below, out of the what you call periphery of the field, and came in at treetop level. And right before us, we had Focke-Wulf 190s that were taken off like bees. And I came in right behind, and they had their wheel up, and they knew we were there. And as the wheels were coming up, they accelerated very rapidly. And our rate of closure was, of course, very rapid. So I came in and shot down one right on as he was taking off, as he was airborne. And I shot down two at that time. And then I pulled up. And from that time on, I mean, it was combat right over the field. And the only thing I can remember is coming back again on another airplane, the third airplane, and I was ready to pull my trigger, and I looked to my left, and there was a Focke-Wulf 190 coming down at me. So I had to break off my attack and pulled into that airplane coming down at me, and I turned into him. And fortunately, he didn't hit me, and I corkscrewed the airplane up to about 9,000 feet. As I corkscrewed the airplane up, I got the altitude and looked around, surveyed the situation again, and there was nobody behind me. Nobody could stay up with me. So I could break combat at will. That's what I mean by breaking off combat at will. So I did. And that gave me all the confidence in the world with that new technology that we had in the P-47. After you get to be a seasoned pilot, you think you're a pro. So, and you are, because you've had a lot of experience and so forth, and now you're calm and collected and so forth. So after one pretty successful combat. Why I found myself all alone. And when you find yourself all alone deep in Germany, it's pretty lonesome, pretty lonely. You're looking for companionship. I saw 6 airplanes. I said, well, I'm going to join 6 airplanes because it must be P-47. And they did look like P-47. So, but they were heading east. And I didn't look at my compass to determine what direction they were going in. But anyway, I pulled this with throttle wide open. I was closing in on them, and then I pulled out to the side, and there were Focke-Wulf 190s. I saw the big cross on the fuselage, and boy, I made a quick 180, and I started heading 270 degrees instead of the 90. Well, those airplanes kept going. But now I saw another little airplane, a loner. He was coming in the opposite direction from what I was going. He was going deep in Germany, and he had about, I'd say he had about 1,000-foot advantage over me in altitude. So I watched him, and I knew it was a German of either a 190 or a 109, so I was hoping that he wouldn't see me. But he did. As he went on by me, and I kept looking back, and all of a sudden he changed his course of direction. He started turning into me 180 degrees, and I said, uh-oh. And my fuel was running low. So I says, oh, boy. So I made up my mind then that I'm going to run him out of fuel. So I left my throttle setting at about 42 degrees to give me enough power, but not excessive power, so I don't burn up too much fuel. So I went down. As he came in on me, I nosed my airplane down, picked up the speed, came up in a chandelle, and came over and gave him a 90-degree deflection shot when I saw his guns, the muzzles, spitting fire. It worked. I mean, a 90-degree deflection shot, that's practically impossible target to hit. But I got on by as I lost my altitude with my chandelle. I nosed down again, and he went on by, did the same thing, came down and started closing in on me, and I started pulling up again. The speed and so forth I picked up in another chandelle, identical to the first one, and gave him a 90-degree deflection shot as he was firing on me. Everything worked because I was running him out of ammunition. He's going to run out of ammunition, go home, and then he'll let me go home. So the third time he did that, everything was about the same as the first 2 times, and I pulled up and I made that 90-degree turn, gave him a 90-degree deflection shot, and his same distance. He was still way back there. But, boy, all of a sudden, I hear a big explosion in the cockpit, and I lost power, and the airplane started falling out of the sky. Uh-oh. So my foot was numb, and I says, oh, my God. So the first thing I thought about is bailing out. But then, in addition to bailing out, because of my power, I lost power immediately. I had my right foot that was numb. So I had no idea what happened there, but I hated to look because if it was shot up and so forth, that sudden shock would kind of put you out of misery. But anyway, I looked and everything was normal, and I started heading down a little bit to maintain my speed, flying speed, since my power was lost. And as I was losing a little altitude, I opened up the canopy. I was going to bail out. So I opened up the canopy, and so I had the canopy open, and I looked at my manifold pressure. And as I was losing altitude, my manifold pressure was building up a little bit. And as I looked at my RPM was coming up pretty well too. So then I had to conclude that I had an engine, at least I had some power. And I decided to close the canopy and go down as fast as I could. There was a layer of clouds beneath me, and it was up to me to get to the layer of clouds before he could finish me off, because the individual, the liftoff pilot, was looking for me after he saw me go through my gyrations and so forth and started heading down. He started heading down after me again. And finished me off before I could get to the clouds. But I got to the clouds before he had a chance to close in on me, and I leveled off and stayed there for a short period of time, and then I'd pull out of the clouds, look back, and he was still back there looking for me. So I got called as I approached the English Channel. I called Mayday and so forth, because I didn't think I was going to make it home because of shortage of fuel and so forth. So I managed to have air-sea rescue alerted and so forth. And I was coming in, I saw Manston off at a distance, and there's a what you call a recovery base, just a big recovery strip for all damaged airplanes coming in at Manston. And I went in on that strip. And as I settled down, my hands and everything was pretty well shaken by then. And but I failed to mention one thing. The reason my foot was so numb, it was a 20 millimeter high explosive that hit my rudder pedal and exploded underneath the rudder pedal. The rudder pedal was shattered, and I had heavy boots on, and it penetrated the bottom of my boot, but it didn't penetrate my foot. And then I found out after I came to a stop, and we looked the airplane over, my turbine supercharger was shot out, and I had 120 millimeter went through my oil tank, and I was just about out of oil. Another close call I've had is when I decided that since I wasn't as good of a shot as many of the other people are, I had to come in close before I fired at somebody. And this one day, it was a 110, and that was coming in behind the B-17s, and I had plenty of altitude, and the squadron came in. There were 12 of them, and they came in, and I picked up one of the airplane. And one of those airplanes that I picked up, I was going to go real close before I started firing, and I did. And I came in so close firing that the pieces of the airplane start coming out, but coming off. And just as I was about ready to pull off, the airplane exploded. It exploded, and, well, that meant that I couldn't go up. I went down. I shoved the stick down and practically closed my eyes then. And I didn't hit anything solid. And I went underneath the airplane. Well, that's another time where I had 20 millimeter that was lodged in the cylinder head. His 20 millimeters that were blown out and flew into the cylinder heads, and my leading edge of the wing was crushed, and so forth. And I had particles of his burnt airplane as it exploded because we didn't have pressurization, so it came through the vents. What I'm trying to bring out is the heat of excitement. And that goes on for a period of time until you become a little bit better, not an amateur anymore, but you're approaching the pro group. So when you get to be a pro, just like boxing or anything else, in other words, the pro is calm, collected. He knows what his next move is going to be and so forth, and he analyzes the enemy well. So there are no miracles. There are no born fighter pilots. Some are a little better than others, and that's about it. But I would say time, training, and more training is the key to any success. I don't care what you do in life.
Ace pilots like Francis Gabreski were forged in the crucible of hard combat. But as he reflects on those powerful incidents almost 60 years later, his perspective has changed. For him, the heated rush of combat is long over. A new generation must now rise to the call.
A war is a young person's, what you call, domain, if you want to call it the domain. But if I use my judgment today as I see it, well, I wouldn't be involved in war. I mean, war is hell. And when you're young, you don't have the, I would say, you have appreciation for what can happen to you, but you have still that unknown quantity because you haven't lived long enough, not enough experience to go back to and analyze a situation as you would when you're 50, as you would as you're 40. You're a young man. You're reckless to a certain degree. That's why you're educated, you're trained to do whatever your job may be. The bomber pilots had a specific job, and their job was about the most difficult job of them all, because they had to drop bombs at a certain particular point, and they couldn't take evasive action once they got to their IP point. They had to stay right on course, and they had all the fighters, the Luftwaffe fighters coming in head-on and so forth, and it takes iron guts, but it also takes dedication. You had sense of responsibility then. You were dedicated to your fellow man. You worked as a team. It wasn't an individual sort of a thing. We talked about how do you get to be, that never comes to your mind. In other words, you're not working to be an ace. You have a job to perform. You have a real serious responsibility to see that those bombers could come back for another day and drop the bombs on the industrial complex, on the Nazi industrial complex. So it's, you've heard a lot of people say that they did daring things and so forth. Yes, they do daring things, but they don't think in terms of those things as daring. They feel that it's the thing to do. They have the feeling in their mind and their heart, and the capability is there. I mean, it's just like somebody drowning, and you're a great swimmer and so forth. Naturally, you're going to go out there and do everything that you can in order to save that man. You become a part of him, and he could turn or pull you down under where maybe he's going to take you with him. But you don't think about that. It's that comradeship. It's something that it's hard to explain. Motivation, politicians don't know what motivation is because it's not in their vocabulary. It's not their game. But we've got to have motivation. We've got to have sense of responsibility. We have to have an objective, and it's a real objective. People objective. And when these people objective in time of war, I mean, it relates itself to your country. We had people to think about. We had a nation to think about.
The airplanes of the Allied Air Forces were the machines that changed the war. And the pilots of these amazing aircraft, brave men like Clarence Anderson and Francis Gabreski, supplied unending courage inside the planes. Without their calm, steely nerves and incredible reflexes, the air war over Europe would have taken a drastically different course. To them and their comrades, 100 bomber crews and thousands of men on the ground, we owe our undying gratitude. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation of In Their Own Words. This program was created and produced by First Person Productions Incorporated in association with the Documentary Broadcasting Company. Produced by David Benson. Written by Rod Pyle. Engineered by Greg Bartheld and Brian Donovan. Narrated by Bill Ratner. This production is copywritten by First Person Productions Incorporated. Any unauthorized broadcast, public performance, or copying is a violation of applicable laws.
History is complicated. The story of human progress is long, messy, and riddled with controversies big and small. On Conflicted, we dive headfirst into history's most infamous events and contentious figures. We try and untangle the good from the bad, the fact from the fiction, and the monsters from the misunderstood. Was Genghis Khan a murderous butcher or a civic pioneer? Did the Allied powers go too far in firebombing the German city of Dresden at the twilight of World War II? And how did the Marquis de Sade acquire such a sinister reputation? And was any of it true? These are just a few of the tough questions we wrestle with and investigate on Conflicted. So if you love history or just enjoy a good story, please join me, your host, Zach Cornwell, for a fascinating new topic each and every month. Conflicted, a history podcast, is available on Spotify, Apple, or wherever else you get your podcasts. I hope to see you soon.